In the blistering heat of a Texas summer, a quiet prairie town uncovered a horror no one could explain. A kind mother turned killer. 5 children, gone. The whispers began. Was it madness? Was it evil? Or was it something much darker hiding behind the silence of the prairie? If you're someone who isn't afraid of digging into America's darkest forgotten corners, subscribe now. Let us know what state you're watching from in the comments. We've built a community of truth seekers here. And you're one of us now. Ready? Let's go back to 1899 and step inside the Yates farmhouse. Part 1. Shadows on the Prairie. It was June, 1899. The air was heavy and hot across the wide, dry plains of eastern Texas. In the small farming town of Cedar Creek, life moved slowly, one hot day after another. But one morning, something happened that would haunt the town forever. Mrs. Helen Morrison, a neighbor, walked to the Yates farm to drop off eggs. It was a normal visit. But what she found inside that house was not normal. The house was quiet, too quiet. Inside, 5 children were lying in their beds, still, silent, cold. Their mother, Margaret Yates, sat on the floor, holding a bloodied knife, her dress soaked with tears and something darker. She had tried to take her own life too. But she had failed. News spread fast in Cedar Creek. A mother had killed her children. People called her a monster. But those who knew Margaret weren't so quick to judge. They remembered who she used to be. Kind, loving, a good mother, a devoted wife. What happened? Let's go back to where it began. Cedar Creek was small, just a few dirt roads, a church, a general store, and a handful of farms. Most people kept to themselves, but they all knew each other. Thomas Yates was a strong German immigrant who came to Texas chasing the American dream. In 1894, he claimed 160 acres through the Homestead Act and started building a farm. He was quiet, serious, and hardworking. But a farm needed more than muscles and tools. It needed a wife. That's where Margaret O'Sullivan came in. Margaret was 19 when she met Thomas. She was beautiful, green eyes, soft voice, and a gentle heart. She had grown up in Austin, far from the rough life of the frontier. Her father worked for the government. She knew books and music, not cows and crops. Still, her parents pushed her to marry. Thomas needed a wife. Margaret needed a future. They met twice. Then they married. Their wedding was simple, just some hymns, a shared cake, and blessings from neighbors. But people said they were a perfect match. He brought the land. She brought grace. At first, it all went well. Margaret learned fast. She milked cows, baked bread, grew vegetables. She sewed clothes and made the home warm and tidy. People admired her. Their first child, William, was born in 1893. Then came Sarah in 1894. Then the twins, James and Mary, in 1896. Finally, baby Samuel arrived in 1898. 5 children in 5 years. Margaret tried her best to be the perfect mother. She taught them from the Bible. She cooked and cleaned and sang lullabies at night. Her garden was full. Her kids were clean. Her husband was proud. But something was happening inside Margaret that no one could see. Life on the farm was hard. Isolated. Thomas often traveled to buy supplies or sell crops. That left Margaret alone, sometimes for days, even weeks, with 5 small children. There was no phone, no car. The nearest neighbor was a mile away. If something went wrong, there was no help coming. And things did go wrong. In 1897, a late frost ruined most of the wheat crop. Then came a dry summer. Water was low, food was scarce, money was tight. Thomas had to take more work farther from home. That meant more time alone for Margaret. In the winter, Mrs. Helen Morrison stopped by and saw something disturbing. Margaret looked exhausted. Her hair was messy. Her eyes were strange, wild and empty. Baby Samuel was crying non-stop, left in a soiled diaper. The older kids sat quietly at the table, too quiet. The house was dirty. The air smelled bad. When Helen asked if everything was okay, Margaret smiled too wide and said, "Everything is fine. The children are just resting." But Helen knew something was wrong. She stayed the day, cleaned the house, changed Samuel's diaper, and tried to talk to Margaret. Margaret kept starting chores and forgetting what she was doing. She stared off into space. She snapped at the children. And sometimes she looked at Samuel not with love, but with resentment. When Thomas came home, Helen told him she was worried. Margaret needed help, she said. Maybe a hired girl to assist with the kids. Thomas shook his head. Women get emotional after babies, he said. She'll be fine, she just needs to toughen up. But she didn't get better. She got worse. Margaret began forgetting things, like buying the same groceries twice in 1 week. She cried during church hymns. The kids showed signs too. William, just 6, went to neighbors asking for food. Sarah stopped smiling and clung to her mother's dress. The twins hid under their beds when anyone raised their voice. Samuel cried almost all the time. The town doctor visited once a month. He checked Margaret and found nothing wrong. He said she was just tired. He gave her laudanum, a liquid medicine with opium, to calm her nerves. It helped, at first. She became calmer, but sleepy, distant. She started needing more of it to feel okay. Thomas kept buying it. He thought things were better. But they weren't. By spring of 1898, Margaret was falling apart. She had learned how to hide it well. She smiled at church. She said all the right things. But the mask was slipping. The meals were simple now, cornbread and milk, day after day. The garden was dying. The house was dusty. The kids were raising each other. And behind her soft voice and gentle smile, something dark had started to grow inside her. Something no one saw coming. Something no one could stop. End of part 1. Subscribe now to follow the true horror behind the Yates family tragedy. Part 2 is coming next, where we dive deeper into Margaret's descent, and the warning signs everyone ignored. The Yates family tragedy. Part 2. The quiet before the storm. Simple language 1000 words, for American YouTube audience. My wife is fine, Thomas Yates said firmly. She's just tired. 5 kids will wear anyone out. People need to stop gossiping and mind their business. That's what he always told neighbors. And most people accepted it. But deep down, Thomas knew something wasn't right. He just didn't want to admit it, not to others, and not to himself. In a small frontier town like Cedar Creek, a man's reputation was everything. His success wasn't only measured in acres or crops, it was measured by how well he kept his family in order. If Margaret was losing control, that meant he was failing. And Thomas Yates couldn't accept that. During the long summer of 1898, Margaret became more withdrawn. She stopped going to church, stopped joining sewing circles, and politely turned down invitations to town events. Her excuses were always the same. The children were too difficult to bring, or she had too much work at home. Even when neighbors came to visit, she didn't open the door. She spoke through it, claiming she was too busy or that the children were napping. The few people who did catch a glimpse of her were shocked. Margaret had grown so thin her clothes hung loose on her frame. Her once beautiful hair was tangled and dull. Her hands trembled constantly, and her eyes, once full of life, now looked empty, flat, and far away. When she spoke, her voice sounded strange, flat, like she wasn't really there. Sometimes, she seemed to be replying to someone no one else could see. Then came baby Samuel's birth in late 1898. The delivery was difficult. Margaret lost a lot of blood and never seemed to recover. She stayed in bed for weeks, staring at the ceiling while the older children tried to care for the house. Neighbors offered to help, but Margaret refused. When Mrs. Morrison tried to do some laundry, Margaret screamed at her until she left. The children cried. Word spread fast. She's not right in the head, people whispered. Something's wrong. Those kids ain't safe. But no one did anything. Back then, there were no child protection services, no mental health care. A woman's condition was seen as her husband's responsibility. And unless she hurt someone, most folks stayed out of it. The winter of 1898 was long and cold. Snow fell heavier than usual, and the Yates farm was cut off for weeks. With Thomas stuck at home and money growing tight, the tension in the house thickened. Margaret's behavior became harder to ignore. She talked to herself constantly. When asked, she claimed she was praying. But the words didn't sound like prayers. The children grew more frightened. Margaret's moods changed without warning. One day she'd laugh and play with them. The next, she'd lock herself in her bedroom and refuse to come out. William, now 6, told a neighbor that his mother had started waking them in the middle of the night. "She says we have to get ready for the journey," he explained. "But she won't say what the journey is." Little Sarah wet herself whenever her mother came close. The twins began pulling their hair and refusing food unless their older siblings begged them to eat. Worst of all, Margaret's behavior toward baby Samuel became deeply disturbing. She would hold him for hours, just staring at him like she was trying to solve a puzzle. When he cried, she didn't soothe him, she sometimes cried back, both of them wailing in a terrible, endless chorus. In March 1899, Drive, Crawford visited and finally realized this wasn't just female nerves. He found Margaret sitting in the kitchen, baby Samuel in her lap, both of them staring into space. It took him 3 tries to get her attention. "They whisper at night," she told him softly. "The children whisper to me. They tell me things, terrible things. The burden is too heavy, doctor. Too heavy." The doctor gave her a stronger dose of laudanum and told Thomas to consider sending her to stay with family in Austin. But Thomas said no. "She'll be fine," he muttered. "Women go through moods. She just needs to remember her place." But Margaret wasn't getting better. She was falling apart. Then in May 1899, something changed. She showed up at the Morrisons' home, barefoot, dress wrinkled, holding baby Samuel. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to Mrs. Morrison. "I can't keep them safe. Something terrible is coming. Please, take them away from me before it's too late." Mrs. Morrison begged her to come inside, to rest and explain. But Margaret shook her head. "No, no, it's too late. They've told me. I have to finish what was started. I have to protect them." She turned and walked away, her baby crying weakly in her arms. Mrs. Morrison stood in her doorway, stunned. She thought about warning Thomas. About calling the doctor. But she didn't. It was a decision she would regret for the rest of her life. The first week of June 1899 brought brutal heat. The sun scorched the land. Even at night, there was no relief. On the morning of June 18, Thomas left for Houston. He hoped to sell their wheat crop for a better price. Before leaving, he gave Margaret instructions. "Keep the kids inside during the hottest hours," he said. "And don't waste water. We can't let the well run dry." Margaret didn't say much. She just nodded. She stood in the doorway with Samuel, the other kids clinging to her skirt. Thomas later said it looked like a picture from a storybook, his perfect family, bathed in golden morning light. It would be the last time he saw them alive. The next day seemed quiet. Mrs. Morrison watched from her kitchen window. She saw the children in the yard, playing in the cooler morning air. Everything looked peaceful, but inside the house, Margaret's mind was falling apart. The whispers in her head grew louder, clearer. The laudanum no longer helped. It made things worse. By June 19, the Yates house was silent. No children playing. No smoke from the kitchen. No signs of life. Worried, Mrs. Morrison walked over with some eggs. She knocked. After a long delay, Margaret opened the door. She looked terrible. Hair loose, dress dirty, eyes wild. "I brought some eggs," Helen said gently. "How are the children?" "They're being good," Margaret replied. "Very quiet. They know now about being quiet." Helen asked to see them. Margaret's face twisted with fear and rage. "No, they're resting. They need to rest. They need to be ready." "Ready for what, Margaret? You wouldn't understand. No one understands the burden. But I know what has to be done. I know how to protect them." She slammed the door. Mrs. Morrison stood frozen. The house was too quiet. Too still. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept checking the window, staring toward the dark, silent Yates house. Something was wrong. Very wrong. End of part 2. Coming up in part 3. The day the door opened, and the terrible truth was finally revealed. Subscribe, like, and share to follow the true horror of the Yates family tragedy. The Yates family tragedy, Part 3. Texas, 1899. The sun was high when Robert and Helen Morrison knocked on the Yates family door. A thick silence hung over the farm, broken only by the buzzing of flies and the distant call of a crow. When Margaret Yates finally opened the door, her face was pale and drawn, her hair pulled back too tightly. Something in her expression made both visitors uneasy. "Margaret, are you feeling all right?" Helen asked gently. "You look very pale." "I feel relieved," Margaret replied. A strange smile flickered across her face. "The burden has been lifted. I've done what needed to be done. They're safe now. All of them are safe from what was coming." Helen and Robert exchanged worried glances. Robert cleared his throat. "Margaret, we'd like to see the children. Mrs. Morrison is concerned about their welfare." Margaret's hands began to tremble, her calm beginning to slip. "No one can see them," she said quickly. "They're sleeping. They mustn't be disturbed. I worked so hard to make sure they could sleep peacefully. They were so tired, so very tired of carrying such heavy burdens." A cold shiver ran down Helen's spine. Something was terribly wrong. "Margaret," Helen said, carefully keeping her voice steady. "Where are the children right now?" Margaret's eerie smile returned. "They're upstairs, sleeping like angels. Perfect little angels who'll never suffer again. I made sure of that. I'm a good mother. The best mothers protect their children from suffering." Robert didn't wait. He pushed past Margaret and rushed into the house. She didn't stop him. She simply stood there, smiling faintly as he and Helen ran up the stairs. The house was silent and hot, the air thick with a strange sweet smell. Everything was clean and quiet, too quiet for a house with 5 young children. Upstairs, Robert and Helen opened the door to the children's bedroom and froze. The 5 Yates children, William, Sarah, James, Mary, and baby Samuel, were tucked neatly into their beds, clean sheets pulled up to their chins. They looked like they were napping, peaceful and still. But their skin was too pale, too still. Robert stepped forward and touched William's face. Cold, rigid. There was no doubt. The children weren't asleep. They were gone. Helen's scream echoed through the house and across the empty fields, sharp and heartbreaking. Downstairs, Margaret sat calmly in her rocking chair, humming a lullaby. When Helen and Robert came running down, their faces full of shock and horror, Margaret looked up in surprise. "You woke them up," she said sadly. "I worked so hard to make sure they could sleep. Now they'll be frightened again." Robert's eyes landed on the table. 2 empty bottles. One was laudanum, the opium-based medicine Crawford had given Margaret for her nerves. The other, paregoric, often used for children's stomach pain. Both bottles were drained. It all became clear. Margaret had given her children fatal doses, likely mixed into their food or drink. Then she had tucked them into bed and waited. Robert ran to summon help. Helen stayed behind, tears streaming down her face. Margaret just rocked in her chair, humming, whispering about how peaceful her children looked. An hour later, the sheriff arrived with Dr. Crawford and several townsmen. Margaret greeted them politely, even offered to make coffee. "They're safe now," she told them calmly. "The voices told me what would happen to them. Terrible things. I had to protect them. That's what a good mother does." Dr. Crawford examined the children. The signs were clear: opium poisoning, likely the night before. The children had died peacefully, unaware. That evening, Thomas Yates returned from his business trip to Houston. The sheriff met him at the edge of town, but no warning could prepare him for the truth. 5 of his children, gone. His wife, lost in madness. Thomas collapsed beside William's bed, sobbing. Margaret sat nearby, watching him with a strange detachment. "Don't cry, Thomas," she said softly. "They're safe now. I saved them from what was coming. Isn't that what a mother should do?" Dr. Crawford tried to speak with Margaret, but her mind was far away. She talked about voices, about terrible futures for her children. William would become violent. Sarah would suffer horrors no mother could bear. The twins would starve. Baby Samuel, she could barely speak of the fate she imagined for him. The voices had told her these things. Real dangers of frontier life, disease, violence, poverty, had twisted in her mind into nightmares. Dr. Crawford discovered Margaret had been planning for days. She'd collected laudanum and paregoric from different sources, lying about what she needed them for. She had even prepared a special meal for the children, cookies and milk, laced with poison. In her room, authorities found letters she had written but never sent. One was addressed to her mother. "By the time you receive this, I will have completed the most difficult task any mother has ever faced. Do not mourn them. They are safe now, in the Lord's arms." The town was shaken. While there was horror, some whispered relief. Margaret had always seemed unstable. But no one had acted. Helen was filled with guilt. She kept talking about protecting them, she told the sheriff. "But I thought she meant from illness, wild animals, not from life itself." Margaret was declared insane and sent to the Austin Asylum. She never showed regret. She believed, until her death 15 years later, that she had saved her children. Thomas Yates left town immediately after the funerals. No one ever saw him again. Rumors said he changed his name and started over somewhere out west. The Yates house sat empty for years before it was torn down. Locals claimed it was haunted, strange lights, sounds in the night. No one dared go near. The tragedy left deep scars and hard questions. How many other women were breaking in silence? How many signs had been missed? Dr. Crawford, burdened with guilt, began studying mental illness in women. He found Margaret's case wasn't unique. Many frontier women suffered quietly, alone, with no help and no understanding. In his private writings, Drive, Crawford confessed, Margaret Yates was not born a killer. She was created by the cruel circumstances of frontier life. Mental illness in women was often labeled as hysteria, treated with tonics and scorn instead of real care. Margaret's obvious signs had been ignored. Her cries for help, misunderstood. Her children were buried in Cedar Creek Cemetery. Their graves are plain, marked only with names and dates. No hint of what truly happened. Over time, visitors came, some curious, some grieving, some searching for understanding. Historians uncovered similar stories. Women lost in isolation, pushed to terrible acts. Prairie madness, doctors had called it. But few tried to understand it. Margaret spent her last years setting imaginary tables for invisible children, talking to ghosts of her past. In her mind, they were still alive, waiting for her. The Yates family tragedy reminds us that the frontier was not just brave settlers and new beginnings. It was also a place of quiet suffering, forgotten women, and children who slipped through the cracks. Margaret Yates wasn't a monster. She was a mother left behind by a world that didn't know how to help her. And her story still haunts the Texas plains to this day. The Yates Family Tragedy, Part 4. Texas, 1899. After the funerals, the town of Cedar Creek was never the same. People avoided the Yates property like it was cursed. The once lively house now stood quiet, its windows dark and broken, its garden overgrown with weeds. The laughter of children had vanished, replaced by whispers and unease. For the next few weeks, curious townsfolk would pass by the property on their way to town, casting quick glances at the empty windows. Some claimed they saw shadows move inside. Others said they heard soft lullabies at night, the same lullabies Margaret used to sing. "I swear I heard her voice," whispered Ruth, the blacksmith's daughter. She was humming, "Rock-a-bye baby," real soft. But no one lives there anymore. Sheriff Harlan dismissed the claims at first. "It's just people's minds playing tricks," he said. "Let the family rest." But as more reports came in, strange lights flickering in the house, a child's giggle drifting across the fields at dusk, footprints in the dirt with no clear source, even he started to wonder. Meanwhile, Drive, Crawford couldn't rest. He kept returning to the records he had made about Margaret. Something didn't sit right. Yes, she had suffered from a mental breakdown. But there were parts of her behavior that didn't fit neatly into any known condition. One afternoon, he visited the asylum in Austin, where Margaret was now kept. He hoped to learn more, not for the town, but for himself. Guilt weighed heavily on his shoulders. Maybe if he had acted sooner, things could have been different. He found Margaret sitting near a window, staring out into the distance. She didn't recognize him at first. Her face was pale, her eyes distant. But when he spoke her name, she turned slowly. "Dr. Crawford," she said, almost in a whisper. "Have you come to visit the children?" He paused. "Margaret, the children are gone. You remember that, don't you?" She smiled faintly, as if he had made a joke. "No, they're waiting for me. Every night they come to my room and tell me stories. William says he wants to be a preacher. Sarah reads me poems. The twins build houses out of playing cards. And baby Samuel, he's growing so fast." Dr. Crawford felt a chill pass through him. She truly believed they were still alive. But her details were too vivid. Too recent. As if she had really spoken with them. "Margaret," he asked carefully, "what do the children tell you?" She leaned in, her voice low. "They say the house isn't empty. Not really. There's something there. Something old. It spoke to them before it ever spoke to me." "What do you mean?" he asked. Margaret's eyes grew wide. "The house is hungry," she said. "It always has been. That's why we heard the whispers in the walls. That's why the wind never stopped at night. It wanted something. And it chose me." Dr. Crawford wrote this off as delusion, at first. But her words stayed with him. Back in Cedar Creek, the house remained a mystery. Teenagers dared each other to get close. Some claimed to hear crying. Others saw movement behind the curtains, even though the house was boarded up. Then, one night in early October, two boys, Henry and Caleb, snuck into the Yates home with lanterns and mischief in their hearts. They didn't come back. The next morning, the sheriff found their bicycles outside the gate, wheels still spinning. He entered cautiously, calling their names. The house was still, the air stale and heavy. Dust coated every surface, yet there were fresh footprints on the floor. In the upstairs hallway, he found one of the lanterns, cracked, still warm. Then he heard it. A soft, distant lullaby echoing through the hall. "Rock-a-bye, baby, in the treetop." The sheriff followed the sound to the children's bedroom. The beds were empty, just like they had been since the night of the tragedy. But on the wall, something new had appeared. Scratched into the plaster, in what looked like small, childlike handwriting, were 5 names. William, Sarah, James, Mary, Samuel. Underneath, scrawled more roughly, "Still here. Still watching." The sheriff turned and fled. A search party was called. No sign of the boys was ever found. People began to say the house was cursed, not just haunted. That it had claimed the Yates children, and now it wanted more. Mrs. Morrison, still shaken by the past, gathered a group from the church to pray at the property. But they were met with strange winds, a sudden downpour, and the sound of a door slamming upstairs, even though the house was empty. That night, she dreamed of Margaret, standing in the doorway of the house, holding her baby in one arm and motioning with the other. "They're not alone," Margaret said in the dream. "The house has more children now. And it's still hungry." Mrs. Morrison woke screaming. Whispers grew. People moved away. The church tried to buy the land and tear the house down, but every attempt failed. Workers refused to step foot inside. Tools broke. Accidents happened. Eventually, the project was abandoned. By the end of 1900, the Yates house had become a legend, the kind passed down in hushed voices around campfires. And still, late at night, when the wind howls just right through the Texas plains, some say you can hear children laughing in the empty house, and the creak of a rocking chair in the dark. To be continued in Part 5. The Yates Family Tragedy, Part 5. Texas, 1899. Sheriff Harlan didn't sleep for 2 nights after the discovery. The names scratched on the wall haunted his dreams. And the missing boys, Henry and Caleb, remained unfound. Their parents wept at town meetings, and their empty chairs in school reminded everyone that the nightmare hadn't ended. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the Yates children had never died. Others whispered that Margaret had made a deal with something dark. A few claimed the land itself was cursed long before the Yates ever moved in. Dr. Crawford returned to Cedar Creek a week later. He had done more research in Austin, digging through old property records and archives. He brought with him a dusty leather-bound journal, The personal writings of Father Thomas O'Reilly, a missionary priest who had lived in the region 50 years earlier. In the journal, Father O'Reilly spoke of a remote property settled by a family in 1840. That family had vanished mysteriously, leaving behind a half-finished house. He described strange voices, moving shadows, and dreams that felt real. After 3 other settlers experienced similar happenings and fled, the land was left untouched for decades, until the Yates family bought it in 1890. Dr. Crawford shared this with Sheriff Harlan and Mrs. Morrison. "You're saying this land has been cursed since before Margaret was born?" Mrs. Morrison asked. "Or," Crawford said carefully, "there's something tied to the land. Something we don't understand. Something that uses children." Sheriff Harlan scoffed. "I deal with real crimes, not ghost stories." "Then explain the boys," Crawford challenged. "Explain the lullabies, the writing on the wall, the chill in the air that never leaves that house." The sheriff had no answer. That night, driven by guilt and curiosity, Crawford went back to the Yates property, alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky with red and gold. He carried a lantern, a Bible, and the old journal. Inside, the air was thick. Dust swirled in the lantern light. The furniture hadn't moved since the tragedy. But the house didn't feel empty. It felt watchful. He made his way upstairs to the children's room. The names were still scratched on the wall, and beside them now, a fresh line had been added. "We're not alone anymore." His breath caught. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice shaking. Silence. He opened the Bible and began to read aloud, but his voice echoed strangely, like it was being swallowed. As he turned to leave, the lantern flickered. A breeze, cold and sharp, rushed past him. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Small ones. Bare feet, pattering on wood. He turned quickly. At the end of the hallway stood a little girl, her dress torn, hair in loose braids. Her eyes were dark, hollow. She raised her hand and pointed behind him. He turned. Nothing. When he looked back, the girl was gone. Dr. Crawford ran. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of town, heart pounding, mind racing. He knew now, this wasn't just in Margaret's head. The house was feeding off something. And it wasn't finished. The next day, he met again with Mrs. Morrison. "We need to bless the house," he said. "We need to bring people together. Not just the church. Everyone." But people were afraid. No one wanted to go near the place. Still, Mrs. Morrison convinced a few, old farmers, young mothers, even the schoolteacher, to join her and Dr. Crawford for a prayer circle outside the house. They gathered at sunset. A dozen townsfolk stood hand in hand, candles lit, as Mrs. Morrison prayed loudly, firmly. As the group recited the Lord's Prayer, the wind rose. The trees bent. The ground trembled lightly beneath their feet. And from inside the house came a sound, not screams, not laughter, but a moaning. Like hundreds of voices weeping in unison. Then came a different sound. Knocking. 3 slow, heavy knocks, from inside the front door. The group fell silent. One of the candles blew out. Dr. Crawford, driven by something he couldn't explain, stepped toward the door. He reached for the handle. The crowd gasped. Inside, no one stood there. But written across the entry wall, in what looked like ash or soot, were more words. "Let us rest. You woke us." Terrified, the group fled. No one returned the next day. Or the day after. But that night, Henry's mother dreamed of her son. He stood at the edge of her bed, face pale but smiling. "It's not our fault, Mama," he said. "We didn't mean to wake it." She sat up, crying out his name, but the dream faded. No one could explain what it was. But they all knew the truth. The house was alive, and the Yates family had only been the beginning. To be continued in Part 6. The Yates Family Tragedy, Part 6. Texas, 1899. The town of Cedar Creek changed after that night. Children were no longer allowed outside after sundown. School attendance dropped. The church held daily prayers. And the Yates house stood like a shadow on the hill, its windows watching, its doors shut tight. No one dared approach it again. Mrs. Morrison, though shaken, refused to give up. "We can't ignore this," she told Sheriff Harlan. Whatever it is, it's not finished. Sheriff Harlan grunted. And what do you suggest, Martha? We already tried prayers. We tried burning sage, bringing the preacher, holding circles like it's some folk tale. And still the nightmares come. He was right. Dreams were spreading through the town like sickness. Almost everyone had them now. Dreams of narrow hallways, whispering voices, strange lullabies, and children walking into darkness. Some even dreamed of Margaret Yates herself, standing barefoot at their windows, whispering through the glass, "Help me." On the third night, a group of townsfolk gathered outside the general store. Their faces were pale, eyes tired. Mr. Lyle, the blacksmith, finally said what others were thinking. Maybe we need to destroy it. The house. Tear it down. Burn the land. Salt the ground if we must. Won't work, came a soft voice. It was Dr. Crawford. They turned to him. You can't destroy something that isn't tied to wood or brick, he said. This isn't about a house. It's about what lives beneath it. He paused, then pulled out Father O'Reilly's journal. In his writings, Father O'Reilly said the land where the house sits was once used by an ancient sect, long before settlers came. They performed rituals, dark ones, and believed in something they called the sleeper below. A force that feeds on grief, especially the sorrow of mothers and the fear of children. People stared. You think Margaret Yates awoke this sleeper? Asked Mr. Lyle. I think she was a victim of it. Just like her children. Just like Henry and Caleb. A hush fell over the crowd. Then came a scream, high, piercing, from the direction of the Yates house. The group ran toward the sound, lanterns in hand. As they approached the property, they saw her, Clara May, Henry's younger sister, standing in the front yard, barefoot, wearing a nightgown. She shouldn't have been there. Her family had locked every door and window after Henry disappeared. She stared at the house, trembling. It called to me, she whispered. It said Henry was inside. Mrs. Morrison wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. It's not Henry, darling. It's something pretending to be him. Clara May looked up, but he said he was cold. He said he missed me. At that moment, the front door creaked open, slowly, without a hand touching it. A soft humming drifted out. A lullaby. The same lullaby Margaret once sang to her children. The group froze. Then drive. Crawford stepped forward. I'll go, he said. No, Sheriff Harlan said, stepping beside him. You'll not go alone. Together, they entered. The house was silent, but the walls seemed to breathe. Dust hung in the air. Like fog. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat. As they passed the kitchen, they saw something scratched into the wooden table. We belong to it now. They climbed the stairs slowly, lanterns shaking in their hands. When they reached the children's room, they found something new, a small wooden box resting on the bed. Sheriff Harlan opened it carefully. Inside were 7 small dolls, handmade from corn husks and twine. Each had a name stitched into the chest: Miriam, Samuel, Clara, Elijah, Ruth, Caleb. Henry. Dr. Crawford gasped. These are the Yates children. And the missing boys. As he reached out to touch the doll marked Henry, the room grew ice cold. The lantern dimmed, and a voice, childlike but hollow, whispered, "He's not yours to save." The floor beneath them shuddered. Sheriff Harlan shouted, "Run!" The 2 men raced downstairs. As they reached the door, it slammed shut. But Clara May, outside, screamed again, and the door burst open. They stumbled into the night, gasping for breath. The house was silent again, as if nothing had happened. But they knew better. They now believed it with all their hearts. The house wasn't haunted, it was hungry, and it had only just begun to feed. To be continued in Part 7. The Yates Family Tragedy, Part 7. Texas, 1899. After the chilling events at the Yates house, Cedar Creek fell into a strange silence. People no longer spoke of the Yates family openly. Parents avoided the topic around children. But the nightmares kept spreading. Dreams of hollow eyes, cold fingers reaching from under the bed, and voices whispering secrets no one should ever hear. Dr. Crawford and Sheriff Harlan knew the truth now. Something ancient, something evil, had awakened. And it was using grief to grow stronger. They called a secret meeting in the church basement. Only a few trusted townsfolk came: Mrs. Morrison, Mr. Lyle the blacksmith, Miss Adeline the schoolteacher, and Father Jonas, the new priest who had replaced Father O'Reilly after his disappearance. Laid out on the table were pages from O'Reilly's journal, the cornhusk dolls, and a sketch of strange symbols found under the Yates children's beds. Father Jonas studied the markings and frowned. "I've seen these before," he said. "In a book I found buried in the church attic. They're not from the Bible. Not from anything holy." Mrs. Morrison crossed herself. "Then what are they?" He hesitated. "They're old. Very old. A language used in rituals meant to bind souls to places. To keep them from passing on." Dr. Crawford leaned forward. "You're saying the children, their spirits are trapped?" Father Jonas nodded. "Yes. And if we don't break the bond, this force, this sleeper below, will keep growing stronger. Feeding on their sorrow." A silence fell. Then Miss Adeline spoke. "Then we need to set them free." They all agreed. Father Jonas suggested a cleansing ritual, one that might unbind the spirits and weaken the presence in the house. But it had to be done before the next new moon, which was only 2 nights away. They began preparing immediately. That night, Clara May had another dream. This time, she saw her brother Henry standing in the old well behind the house. He wasn't crying. He was smiling, but it wasn't a kind smile. His eyes were pitch black. And he said, "The sleeper showed me how to never be afraid again. It's your turn now." She woke up screaming. The group knew they had to act quickly. By sundown the next evening, they were ready. They carried candles, holy water, salt, and the dolls. Father Jonas led the way, reciting prayers under his breath. The rest followed in silence. As they approached the Yates house, a cold wind rushed through the trees. The windows glowed faintly, even though no one lived there. Father Jonas drew a circle of salt around the house, then placed the dolls in the center of the children's old bedroom. "We must call their names," he said, "and ask them to let go." They knelt and began. "Miriam Yates, you are loved. Be at peace. Samuel Yates, your pain is over. Go to the light. Clara May." Father Jonas paused. "No, she's still alive." One by one, they called out the names. As they did, the room began to tremble. The floorboards groaned. The dolls twitched. Then came a voice. "Margaret Yates." She appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, eyes empty, lips barely moving. "Why did you come back?" she whispered. Father Jonas stood. "We're here to free them. They don't belong to you." Her face twisted. "They're not mine. Not anymore. They belong to him now." She raised her hand, and the walls split open. From inside the cracks came hundreds of small, black hands, like those of children, but twisted, with claws instead of fingers. They reached for the townsfolk, grabbing at their legs, pulling at their clothes. Mrs. Morrison screamed, "Finish it. Say the last name." But drive. Crawford had dropped the final doll, Henry's. He dove for it as the black hands pulled at him. "Henry Yates," he gasped. "You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are free." The moment he spoke the words, a deafening wail filled the room. The hands vanished. The house shuddered, then fell silent. Margaret dropped to her knees. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I couldn't let go," she whispered. "He promised me I'd never be alone again." She collapsed and faded into dust. Father Jonas made the sign of the cross. The group walked out into the night, shaken but alive. But behind them, deep below the house, something still stirred. It had lost its children. But it had learned their names. To be continued in Part 8. The Yates Family Tragedy, Part 8. Texas, 1899. Even though the ritual at the Yates house had brought peace to the children's spirits, no one in Cedar Creek felt safe. A heavy stillness lingered in the air. Crops withered overnight. Dogs barked at empty barns. Some folks whispered that they saw shadows walking the fields at dusk, tall, crooked figures with no eyes. At night, Father Jonas kept watch from the church tower. "It's not over," he told Sheriff Harlan. "We weakened it, but we didn't destroy it." "What do you mean, it?" the sheriff asked. The priest didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed over a page from Father O'Reilly's journal. There, written in shaky handwriting, were the words. The sleeper below speaks in dreams. Promises love, protection, power. But it is not God. It is ancient hunger. Sheriff Harlan clenched his jaw. Then we find it and finish it. Dr. Crawford joined them in the church basement that same evening. He had news. I went back to the Yates property, he said. Something called me there. I don't know why, but I found a stone. Round, carved with strange writing, buried in the ashes of the fireplace. He unwrapped it. The stone was black, cold to the touch, and pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. Father Jonas gasped. That's not from this land. It's a binding stone. Whoever holds it can call the sleeper. Sheriff Harlan stepped back. You mean like summon it? Worse, the priest said. Invite it. Dr. Crawford spoke softly. There's more. I read through Margaret Yates's letters. Hidden in her dresser. She didn't go mad all at once. She wrote about voices, gentle at first. They told her she could keep her children safe forever. That death was only a doorway. Miss Adeline entered the church, pale and out of breath. I just came from Clara May's room, she said. She was drawing pictures in her sleep. She showed them a torn sheet. On it were 6 stick-figure children standing in a circle around a black shape. Above it, in a child's handwriting, were the words. He said he still has one. The room went silent. Father Jonas looked at the stone. The sleeper didn't get all the Yates children. Clara May lived, and now, he wants her back. They rushed to the orphanage where Clara May had been staying under Miss Adeline's care. But her bed was empty. A window was open. Muddy footprints led out into the yard. And on her pillow lay another corn-husk doll, this one soaked in blood. Sheriff Harlan cursed under his breath. We've got to find her. Dr. Crawford, his hands shaking, turned to Father Jonas. Is there a way to use the stone to track the sleeper? Father Jonas hesitated. Yes. But it's dangerous. The stone works like a beacon. It calls to the sleeper, and the sleeper calls back. Without waiting, Sheriff Harlan grabbed the stone and held it tight. Instantly, the candles in the room flickered out. A whisper filled the air. Come below. She waits for you. The ground beneath the church rumbled. Father Jonas dropped to his knees, chanting prayers. It's opening a path. The sleeper's lair is not in this world, but the stone can lead us. Sheriff Harlan stood. Then let it lead. They gathered torches, rope, and holy water. By nightfall, the stone began to glow. They followed it to a place behind the Yates farm, a collapsed well sealed decades ago. The stone floated from Sheriff Harlan's hand and hovered over the well. Then it dropped. They heard no splash. Just silence. Looks like we're going in, the sheriff said. Miss Adeline volunteered to stay at the surface and keep watch. The others, Sheriff Harlan, Father Jonas, and Dr. Crawford, lowered themselves into the darkness. The air grew cold. The walls were slick, and far below, they landed in a large underground chamber. It smelled of earth, rot, and something older than time. In the middle of the cave stood a crooked altar made of bones and wood. Clara May sat beside it, eyes closed, humming. When she opened her eyes, they were not her own. They were black. She smiled. He says you came too late. To be continued in Part 9. The Yates Family Tragedy, Part 9. Texas, 1899. The cave was silent, except for Clara May's soft humming. Her eyes, dark as coal, followed the flickering torchlight in Father Jonas's hand. Clara, Sheriff Harlan called gently, stepping closer. It's me. It's the sheriff. We're here to bring you home. But Clara didn't answer. She tilted her head, and when she spoke, it was not her voice. There is no Clara here. Only the mouth. Only the vessel. Father Jonas grabbed his cross and began reciting scripture. In the name of the Father, the Son. Clara shrieked, high and unnatural. Her tiny hands clenched into fists, and the ground trembled beneath them. Back, shouted Drive, Crawford, pulling the sheriff away. She's not herself. The stone they had followed, now pulsing with red light, rose from the floor and hovered between them and the girl. Runes carved into its surface began to glow. Father Jonas turned to them. The sleeper is using her to open a rift. A doorway. If we don't stop it now. The wall behind the altar cracked open, revealing a deeper tunnel. Thick black fog poured out, and a groan echoed from the abyss. Sheriff Harlan stepped forward. "We came here to save a child. So let's save her." But Clara's body levitated, surrounded by dark tendrils. She spoke again, voice deeper now. "You broke the circle, took what was promised. Now the debt must be paid." Father Jonas yelled, "We need to sever the bond between her and the sleeper. Destroy the stone." Dr. Crawford grabbed the torch and lunged at the floating stone. But as he got close, the air thickened like molasses, and he froze mid-step. The sleeper was watching. It was near. A grotesque shape began to form from the fog, tall, hunched, with limbs too long and too many eyes glowing dimly. Father Jonas fell to his knees, reciting a final prayer. Sheriff Harlan didn't wait. He pulled his revolver and fired a shot straight into the stone. The bullet struck true. The stone shattered. A sound like thunder roared through the cave. The dark fog screamed and recoiled. Clara May dropped to the ground, limp. The sleeper's form unraveled like smoke caught in wind. The runes vanished. The altar cracked. And everything went still. Dr. Crawford rushed to the girl and checked her pulse. "She's breathing. She's alive." Sheriff Harlan picked her up carefully. Her eyes fluttered open, no longer black. "Just tired." "Is Mama here?" she whispered. "No," he said softly. "But you're safe now." The chamber shook once more. Rocks began to fall. The cave was collapsing. "Time to go," yelled Father Jonas. They scrambled back to the rope and climbed as fast as they could. Just as the last of them reached the surface, the old well caved in, sealing the darkness forever. The dawn broke over Cedar Creek like a cleansing rain. The strange whispers stopped, the shadows faded, and peace returned. Later that week, Father Jonas held a small service for the Yates family. No bodies had been found, only memories and grief. But the townsfolk came, quiet, respectful, and thankful. Clara May was taken in by Miss Adeline and began to heal. She no longer drew strange pictures or spoke in her sleep. Dr. Crawford returned to his studies, though he kept the shattered pieces of the binding stone in a locked drawer. Sheriff Harlan visited the ruins of the Yates farm one last time. He found a small music box among the debris. He turned the key. It played a soft lullaby. And for a moment, the wind in the trees sounded like children laughing. But when he turned to leave, something caught his eye. A small corn-husk doll, sitting on the fence post, smiling. To be continued in the final part, Part 10. The Yates Family Tragedy, Part 10. Final part. Texas, 1899. Summer faded into fall. The fields of Cedar Creek turned golden and quiet. But for those who had seen the darkness beneath the well, the silence wasn't comfort, it was a warning. Clara May lived with Miss Adeline now. Her cheeks had color again, her laughter returned. Most days, she played with the other children. But some nights, she still woke up screaming. Sheriff Harlan checked in often. He'd bring her peppermint sticks and ask how she was doing. One day, Clara handed him a picture she drew. It was of a girl, herself, standing with a man in a black coat, a glowing crack behind them. "That's you," she said. "When you saved me." Harlan smiled, though his eyes stayed on the crack she'd drawn. "You remember what happened?" "Some of it," Clara whispered. "But not the bad parts. Just the feeling, like something's still hungry." Meanwhile, Drive, Crawford returned to Houston, leaving behind a sealed box in the sheriff's office. Inside were the broken pieces of the binding stone and his handwritten notes. A letter sat on top. "If the dreams ever return, burn this box. Do not hesitate." Father Jonas, who had lost his faith once, began preaching again. His sermons were softer now, filled with warnings of unseen battles and the power of belief. But Cedar Creek hadn't forgotten. The well was gone, buried beneath heavy stone and iron crosses. No one dared step near it. Yet, strange things continued to happen. Livestock were sometimes found with wide, unblinking eyes. Children whispered about shapes in the cornfields. And one night, Miss Adeline found Clara standing at the window, humming that same tune from the well. "Sweetheart," Adeline asked, "why are you awake?" Clara turned slowly. Her eyes were her own, but just for a second, Adeline thought she saw a flicker. A shadow behind the blue. "I was listening," Clara said. He's whispering again, but quieter now. Adeline pulled her close. There's no one here but us. Clara didn't reply. She just looked up at the moon. A year later, a new family moved into Cedar Creek. They built a home near the old Yates property, ignoring the locals' warnings. Their daughter, Ellie, played alone most days. One afternoon, she came home with something in her arms. A gift, she told her parents. From the girl in the field. They asked what girl, but Ellie just smiled and placed the object on the table. It was a corn-husk doll. Old, smiling, eyes stitched in black thread. The end. Some stories are forgotten for a reason. Bell, if you enjoyed this chilling tale of the Yates family tragedy, don't forget to thumbs up, like the video. Speech balloon, leave a comment with your thoughts or theories. Send mail, share it with friends who love horror. Check mark, and most importantly, subscribe for more haunted tales from the forgotten corners of history. Jack-o'-lantern, more horrors await. Will you be brave enough to follow?